People are all different, aren't they? We're all different. It's blindingly obvious in many ways. What's happened over the last couple of years, through all these lockdowns, as all of us have got through it as best as we can, as best as our families can, is that we've actually got more and more used, I think, at least I have, maybe it's only just me, but I think it's us, we've got used to having things our own way. Used to making our choices. For example, what we watch, when we watch, on the device we watch. We've got our own screens, we choose. We haven't had to talk to strangers. And some of us have quite enjoyed not having to talk to strangers and not having to talk to that slightly difficult person who we find it a bit of a challenge to have a conversation with. And we've all got really good at being individuals. So much, so obvious. So question, what binds us in the room together? What unites individuals into something bigger, something of a human race? What unites us around the world, if anything? At Christmas time, we are remembering a story that does have that power and does have that potential. A story of God at work supernaturally that claims to be a true story. In fact, the true story that underlies everything else. That you and I can base our lives on. So for these few minutes, we're going to think about just one sentence from the angel delivered to the shepherds keeping watch over their flocks on that first Christmas night. It should come up on the screens. We've had it already, though. It's this sentence: I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Notice that word all the people. Back then in Judea, 2,000 years ago, the divide between rich and poor was even greater than it is today. But the angel comes with a message for all the people, whether it's Herod in his palace or whether it's the shepherds on the hillside, working men who didn't wash that often. It's true. The angel says he has a message for all the people. And it's good news of great joy. Good news is translating the word gospel. It's a technical word for an announcement that is about history changing and it being great news for other people. Like the end of a battle, a conflict is over. The victory has been won. There is good news, there is gospel to announce. And the clue to what's so exciting, what this good news is in the second half of what we had up, which is what the angel says: a Saviour has been born. We've thought about being individuals. And I guess we've also become aware in the last couple of years, if we weren't already, that individualism has a bit of a dark side, doesn't it? The Bible word for the dark side of individualism is sin. It's where I want my things my way, whatever you want, however it affects you, however it affects me in the long term. I want my things, I want them now, my life, my rules, my choice. And can we see, well, we don't need to think too hard, do we? What does it do to a world when you've got 7 billion people all going, my life, my rules, my choice? Whatever you think, however it affects you. And we don't have to look out into the world, we only have to look into our own families to see the potential of that kind of dark individualism, the me-firstness, the way that sin divides, doesn't it? It causes those arguments, it divides us from each other. And of course, nowadays, if someone says or does something that I don't like, that I don't agree with, I can just decide to cancel them, can't I? Delete them. Just do it with a click. Or, because this isn't just a modern problem, I could do it in the old school way. You know the old school way, don't you? Oh, how lovely to see you. Very polite. You haven't clicked a button, but you're polite to their face, and then you cut them out of your life behind the scenes. Because this whole thing is not something new. Social media does not cause sin and division. It simply amplifies it. It just makes it easier and easier to be in an echo chamber of people who agree with us on whichever range of topics we choose. That's sin. That's the dark side of individualism. And the most serious thing about it is the way it divides us not only from each other, but from God. Because you see, when I say to God, listen, God, I want my things, my way, or maybe the polite version of that. If I say to God, my life, my rules, to the one who gives me life, then I'm slamming the door in the face of his love for me. And we're all doing that, aren't we? He loves us, and we just say, nah, my way, my rules. And God could, of course, simply withdraw our permission to keep breathing. But because he's a God full of grace, he doesn't. And instead, he sends Jesus into the world. This is the good news. This is what it's all about. He sends his own Son into the world to bridge the divide from heaven's side to earth. And we always remember, it's been in some of the carols already, that 33 years after the events of the first Christmas, we had the events of the first Easter. On a Roman cross, the breath was crushed out of Jesus as he paid for my wrong, for my dark individualism in my place and for yours. And he not only bridged for when he came from heaven to earth, he bridged back when he died for us, paid for us, and then rose again from the dead and returned to God to make a way for you and for me and for everyone who puts their faith in him. That is the message of Jesus coming into the world at Christmas. That is the history-changing event, which is gospel, good news for all people, all of the time, in every place. And naturally, it brings great joy. Just brings great joy as we understand and receive that. I don't know what comes to mind as you hear those words, great joy. What comes to mind as an example for you of joy? If you're old enough, you may have been there, or you may have seen the pictures of 1945, VE Day, the streets of London crowded with people raising the V of victory, of the salute, the relief, the joy on people's faces. Or it may be some kind of sporting triumph that you think of when you think of joy. I lived in Manchester in 1999, and I watched the Champions League final with a bunch of Man U fans, and it was tense. It was gloomy. But then they scored, and then they scored again, and the shout, the cheer, the explosion of joy, the dancing down the street, grown men singing at the top of their voices and hugging total strangers. That for me was an unforgettable experience of spontaneous joy, unadulterated, as those fantastic Man U fans celebrated their team's triumph. Joy. How much more the joy of God sending his own Son to save us, to build that bridge back to him. As it dawns on us what God has done, and maybe we taste it actually, we do taste it in the carols, I think, because they're all set to really joyful tunes, aren't they? And we just taste, yeah, this is good news, this is really good news, this is joyful news, this is spontaneous joy. Day to day, though, it's much more day to day. Day to day, it's like realizing the significance of an incredible victory that's been won in history that changes everything and that ushers in a new era of comfort, of peace, of hope, and so of rejoicing. That's what we have with the message of Christmas with Jesus Christ. So that even when we do go through suffering, whether it's an illness or a bereavement, or a relationship breaking down, or lockdown, whatever we're going through, whatever sin destroys, in our experience, whatever it is, we know that there's a God who loves us, we know that there's a God who's for us, and we know that there's a God who is with us, whatever we're going through in all of life's twists and turns. That Man U victory in '99, it didn't bring joy to everyone in Manchester, only to the red half, not the blue half of the city. This news of great joy is for all the people. All the people. We may all be different. We may all be individuals. God's made us that way, actually. It's brilliant being all different. It's brilliant making your choices, being the person you're meant to be, fulfilling the purpose that God has given you in life, discovering what that is. If you're young and thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do, well, don't worry. Just keep discovering it. It's brilliant the way we're all different. But when we use that privilege in a dark way, well, we're not fulfilling our potentials, and that actually is something we all do. So that's something, for a starter, that all unites us, that in spite of our differences, is we're all united in our sin. But the glorious message of Christmas is we're all united in God's response to our sin, in God's love for each of us, in his sending Jesus for all of us, bridging the divide between heaven and earth. First when he comes, then when he dies and rises and returns to God and makes that way back for absolutely everyone, every boy, every girl, every man, every woman who puts their faith in him.